Hi there, I'm Daniel Seberg at Google in New York City, and I am joined right now for this Hangout by Anna Marie Cox. She is a political columnist for The Guardian. Anna, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everyone out there in Google World, which I guess is the whole world, basically. So, hi, world. Hello, world.
All right. And we've also got Jim Geraghty, who is a National Review blogger at the campaign spot. Jim, would you like to also say hello?
Greetings from my illustrious home office, now realizing how much I probably should have cleaned up behind me. Despite appearances, I am not planning the invasion of Europe, but I am prepared for that scenario, if needed.
Can you move some pieces about on that map behind you in some way?
As you can see, there's a high-pressure system coming here. Coming from down here.
Exactly where is that European-style socialism? Is that the map? Just the map?
Exactly, yes. Oh, but very bad, less bad, almost acceptable.
Before we take over the world, let's talk about politics. And Anna Marie, of course, last night was this debate in Arizona with the remaining 4 candidates. And Rick Santorum has drawn ire from you recently with regards to his stance on a number of social issues. We keep hearing about how the economy is going to be the big issue going into the election. If he does win the Republican nomination, how do you see that Santorum's social conservatism will play out in a general election?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to bet that Jim's probably going to agree with me on this, that agree or disagree with his positions on a lot of social issues, they kind of rub Americans, or a lot of independent voters, I should say, the wrong way. Or I think that they have the potential to. He does have some views that are outside the mainstream. His views on contraception are definitely outside the mainstream. He's tried to make a distinction between his views and how he would, treat things in policy. And I do think that's a valid distinction to make, but it might be a little subtle for a lot of people. And it's funny because of all the candidates remaining, I think he and Ron Paul are actually the most approachable and human and genuine, and they're also the ones that have the policies that are least like what people are used to. So it's kind of an interesting combination. I'd be interested to hear what Jim thinks. I think there's a lot of people in sort of GOP, I think what we now call it is GOP elites, but I would actually maybe think that the right way to put it is GOP opinion leaders or people who write and talk in public, that if Rick Santorum gets the nomination, that would be bad. And I'm wondering if Jim would agree with that.
Yeah, Jim, go ahead. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. Worth noting that for all the perception of Rick Santorum as the front runner, at this point, he has 3 delegates.
Good
point. At least
point.
those among who are actually formally committed to him. A lot of what we've seen in terms of the caucuses so far are actually not determining which delegates go to the national convention, as we saw in Iowa, as we saw in Nevada. They have these caucuses, and then they have county caucuses, and then they go up to regional caucuses, and they go up to state caucuses. Just picture your March Madness Sweet 16 bracket and how it gets narrower and narrower.
Oh, and even then, I'll jump in and say, even then, they're not necessarily committed delegates in a lot of places. Even then, they could possibly switch to someone else if they wanted to, or if their candidate backs out.
It depends state by state. Some of them are committed to the first ballot. They have the convention. Now, it's been about 30 years since anybody even had to worry about any of this stuff. But it's worth noting that in terms of actual delegates, Rick Santorum is not nowhere near the front runner you would think that the media coverage suggests. A couple of weeks ago when we had the Nevada, Colorado, and Minnesota decision, no actual delegates were allotted that night. Now, it was the opening step in this multi-step process, so Santorum sort of deserves his title as the quasi-front runner. But at this point, look, Michigan looks very, very tight between Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney. The polls pretty much have Romney ahead in Arizona, and Arizona is a winner-take-all state. So my guess is that Mitt Romney is actually going to come out of Tuesday looking pretty good, and I'd be very surprised if he didn't have a good Super Tuesday the week after that as well. So some of this with Rick Santorum, this discussion, is overstating his role as the likely nominee. Now, having said that, whether any particular social issue is going to be alienating to independents or something, look, I can't help but notice that gas is $4 a gallon in a whole bunch of places. That strikes me as a pretty obvious area to go after this president. And somebody had observed last night that he only used the word, that Rick Santorum didn't use the word jobs in any of his comments. Now, on the one hand, you're somewhat constrained by what the moderators ask you about.
And there weren't a lot of questions about jobs.
There was a point during the earmark discussion where I actually found myself thinking, God, I wish somebody would bring up contraception. Or who would make the best first lady, or this or that, Coke or Pepsi, or any of these wonderful, brilliant, insightful questions we've had so far in these 20 debates so far. And thankfully they got to somewhat more relevant topics. I wouldn't even argue that earmarks is an irrelevant topic. Although we happened to see John McCain make a very big deal about them in 2008, and lo and behold, people tend to not care about that when the entire economy is collapsing around them. So as much as it drives me bonkers to see money going to ridiculous projects and stuff like that, strangely enough, you need a certain perspective of what's on people's minds. We have seen a slight downward grade in the unemployment rate in the last couple of months, but still quite a few folks have left the workforce in the past couple of years to kind of, or put a certain perspective on that slight improvement we've seen in recent months.
I was just going to say, I did like the question last night about distilling themselves down to one word.
Mm.
Yeah, you can ask us that at the end of this conversation.
I am going to ask you to describe yourself in one word.
All the words they should have said, such as severe, cranky.
All right. Now, Jim, you talked a little bit about President Obama, and you recently noted that both Santorum and Romney, Obama leads both Santorum and Romney when we're talking about registered voters nationally. Do you think that would change if we were talking about likely voters?
Traditionally, Republicans do about 1 or 2 points better amongst likely voters. There are certain voters out there who are registered to vote who are generally lean Democrat and who then tend to not show up on every day. You have heard Republicans, when they see rain, say, this is our weather. So there's a certain number of Democrat voters out there who are perhaps a little less reliable to get out to the polls on Election Day. We shouldn't overstate this. There's a part of me that wouldn't be stunned to see likely voter polls coming out and showing a less than 1 percentage point difference in compared to the registered voter numbers. But it does seem that whatever the conventional wisdom is, like they say about the weather in Chicago, wait 15 minutes and it'll change, and you'll like it better, because the perception was that Obama was in deep, deep trouble towards the end of last year, or maybe, towards the fall. Things started getting a little better for him, and then now we've seen this kind of tidal wave change in conventional wisdom, saying that Obama's got the wind at his back, and pardon all the weather and nautical metaphors you're seeing here. That he's on easy street. Well, now lo and behold, Gallup comes out with a poll result that challenges all of that, and the whole idea of Anna Marie laid out the issues that may not necessarily play well with the soccer moms or your average voter who's worried about their jobs, worried about their pensions, worried about their value of their house, and so on. But nonetheless, that allegedly unelectable Rick Santorum is down by 1 percentage point amongst registered voters. And Mitt Romney, the stiff, boring guy who can't connect with everybody, he's up by 4. So something in this conventional wisdom is a little overstated. Now, there's a part of me that isn't quite sure. This doesn't necessarily follow natural, easy triggers, which is say, well, Obama tripped and fell down the stairs getting off Air Force One last week. Everybody thinks he's a klutz, and that's why he's down last couple of weeks. If people have an idea of why in the last couple of days Obama would be sliding, I'd be very interested in hearing that. But it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, I would say. I think Jim knows this, that those numbers are well within a margin of error. Like right now, it's really hard to tell exactly what's going to happen. I do think the distinction between registered voters and likely voters is a pretty important one. Jim's right that Democrats kind of conform to stereotype a little bit in terms of their attitude towards actually going to the polls. I do also want to sort of, strengthen or amend my remarks about what I was saying about Santorum and social issues, just to make my point that is actually more in line with what Jim was saying. Is these social issue positions that Santorum has are alienating, but even more alienating is the fact that he is not talking about the economy, that these social issues are distracting from the economy, and that these social issue positions are all people know about him. I actually think that should he get the nomination or even sort of have more time in the spotlight to maybe refine his own remarks about things, his economic message does resonate really well with blue-collar Republican voters, and I think that he could make that argument. I think that people know Mitt Romney's argument for what his attitude towards economic policy is, and clearly, like, there's something not clicking, you know. And I think that's actually the real problem. Sort of, I do suspect that Mitt Romney is going to get the nomination, and I think it's just interesting. People are getting to know him and not really responding. And I think that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, recently you did write about how President Obama would be lucky to run against Rick Santorum, but now that Santorum is performing better than Romney in these head-to-head polls, even though we're sort of talking about what does that really mean, really. Why is Santorum not the strongest Republican candidate, do you feel like, even in light of these poll numbers?
Well, like I said, I think that people are only. I think that he suffers in a way for his somewhat admirable conviction, in that he has been talking about these social issues for a long time. That's kind of his brand, and that is definitely going to be the first thing that people get to know about him. That is like what the media has picked up, for better or for worse. That's what you're going to hear on late night comedy. That's what you're going to hear sort of as the first line in a lot of coverage of him. And I think that that is not what voters really want to be talking about right now. So in the debate last night, when they brought up contraception, there was a big boo, and I couldn't quite understand why that was at first.
That's not for whom the crowd boos, Anna Marie.
And because at first I was like, do they realize that this is a loser issue, like, and they don't want the question to be asked? And then I realized that. And then my other thought was. That maybe they realize that when the media talks about contraception and talks about social issues, they kind of, and I will kind of just cop to this, the media does have a liberal bias, especially on social issues, and so when they cover this kind of controversy, it tends to get shaded in such a way that the people with the conservative views on it look bad. No matter how honorably they come to their convictions. So I thought that might be why they're going. And then I realized, and Jim, maybe if you have sort of the mind meld here, you can confirm or deny, but that they probably were booing the actual birth control policy that Obama's perceived to have. What was it, Jim?
No, I think very much it was, oh, here we go again. And,
okay.
You know, a name we have not mentioned in this entire discussion so far, and rather revealingly, is Newt Gingrich, who, as we all know, I had described, last night was the 20th Republican presidential debate, and so since Romney has said he's opting out of the next one, and it's not clear we will have any additional ones, this was the season finale for the hit show, Republican Presidential Debates. It's been on all year. It's a ratings bonanza. And you would have a lot of twists and turns of the debate season. The opening episode in which Tim Pawlenty did not choose to go after Mitt Romney on Obamacare. He hesitated, and just like in an episode of 24, that can end up being fatal for you, so to speak. And I had said, describing the entire course of the debates as a television series season. My favorite was the back-to-back special episodes in which Newt Gingrich went on his vendetta of vengeance against the moderators, against Juan Williams and John King. As well, remember last night was John King. As I said, well, naturally for the series, for the season finale, they bring back their favorite villain. And John King was
last night. Newt Gingrich described himself as cheerful.
Yeah.
And last night he was. Yes, he had been very persistent and aggressive in other ones, but yeah.
Despite the fact that he believes that we are now in total war, he is cheerful.
He's you've heard of happy warriors. This is a cheerful warrior. So Newt Gingrich, has it started to become a pattern fairly early in these debates that Romney and Perry would go after, a whole bunch of candidates would go after each other, and then Newt Gingrich would go and bite the head off the moderator, hurl it into the audience and yell, "Are you not entertained?" in gladiatorial form, and that's what Newt does best. And the audiences generally love it. And they love it for two reasons. One, it's just fun. But two, also, they generally believe that with the exception of Fox News, the vast majority of debate moderators are out to make their candidates look bad. And in some cases, I think this is overwrought. In some cases, I think this is very genuine. In some cases, like Diane Sawyer, I think the moderators are strung out on cold medicine and, fairly incoherent, and there's a medical reason for this.
Well,
so with that question, I think there's this sense of oh, here we go again. Here comes birth control. Here come the Republicans to ban your birth control, when in fact they keep emphasizing that, and yet somehow, strangely enough, that never seems to get through in a lot of the discussion of this topic. So,
right. But overall, I'm sure a lot of folks.
They wanted this discussion to be aborted, you could say.
Yeah. Oh, shit. But yes, I think we could all agree that the debates have become something of a spectator sport.
Yes.
For people watching at home. Now, we haven't even gotten past Super Tuesday, and we've got 4 candidates remaining. But I wanted to get your thoughts on possible vice presidential candidates, and if any of them are up on the stage right now, should they not win the nomination?
I think Jim has because he knows this field and this bench better than I do, will have a much longer answer to this question, not about the candidates on stage, thank you for limiting it to that, but the people who are on stage. I would say of those on stage, for all the bad things I said about Rick Santorum, I think he actually would be a pretty smart vice presidential choice for Mitt Romney, assuming, again, Mitt Romney gets nomination. I think Newt probably wouldn't have a vice president on the ticket. He probably would just say he could do it all. Or the advanced cloning technology would take care of it. I don't know. But I think Rick Santorum would balance out a lot of Romney's weaknesses. And he is the kind of speaker that when one of Romney's big weaknesses is sort of connecting, and Rick Santorum does do that. That said, I am not sure that would actually happen. I think the odds are pretty long. But, everyone talks about Marco Rubio as being sort of an obvious choice. I suspect that's going to be the one name you can maybe scratch off the list. And then actually the list gets really interesting. I know Jim has more to say about this than I do, but I suspect, as with, a lot of times, it's going to be someone that's not on people's radar. And it's going to be someone that can balance out the weaknesses that Mitt Romney has. So it's going to be someone who's not on people's radar, but who should be, I guess. Jim, I will be the moderator here. Take it away.
The first thought, and worth noting, is that the only way we end up with a ticket that is made up of the 2 of the folks who were on the stage last night is if politics require them to.
Yeah.
If you end up with a situation in which, Mitt Romney wins 51% of the delegates, and Rick Santorum wins 49%, and there's these 2 established blocks, and the only way to make peace between them is to put them on the same ticket, that could happen. However, let's assume that Mitt Romney gets the nomination. Let's assume that he wins it, without, desperately needing to unify the party, and he has some certain flexibility there. I don't think he will go with any of his current rivals. I think that you have seen. Look, Obama and Biden ran against each other. Kerry and Edwards ran against each other. It's not unthinkable to see, 2 guys running for the same office unify the party in one ticket. However, you always end up with that inevitable moment in which, wasn't it Biden had said that Obama was the first clean African American?
Clean and articulate.
The awkward attacks from past times. So
they resurface.
Sure. If you end up picking somebody else, some unknown figure out there, then you avoid all of those problems. Now, obviously, Marco Rubio is the name that seems to be coming up most often. An interesting wrinkle today. I believe it was, BuzzFeed has found that for a short time in his youth, and they have not specified what a short time means, Marco Rubio was in the Mormon Church. To me, this matters not a whit. There are some bloggers, including those who abuse, I enjoy a great deal, like Ace of Spades, who are seeing this as a big potential problem. You could have a Romney-Rubio ticket. 2 Mormons! Well, 1 former Mormon and 1 current Mormon. And Ace of Spades and some other folks are saying, ooh, this might really be a problem. Now, I know there are some Americans out there who have problems with, who would never vote for a Mormon. These are stupid people. These are people who'd like to impose a religious test upon holders of the Oval Office. My attitude is I want the very best man or woman for the job. I don't care if they worship Kodos and Kang from The Simpsons at the end of the night. If they, are going to be,
I think Jim is probably unique in that particular choice. But
yeah, that's not what that wouldn't be my first choice, So the idea that first of all, the idea that a time of one's life, again, we're saying boyhood, we're talking about 8 or 9 years old, and we don't know exactly how long it lasted, but the idea that this should be some sort of major impediment to selecting Marco Rubio as the vice presidential nominee, not his relative youth, not his relative limited amount of time spent in statewide elected office. The idea that this would be a reason to not pick him, I find nonsensical and asinine and kind of giving in to the perception of anti-Mormon bigotry. And let me observe, look, you can find Republicans and evangelical conservative Christians who will not vote for a Mormon. If you look at the polling number, you are more likely to find people who self-describe progressives who would refuse to vote for a Mormon. The issue of the Mormon Church, of people who are really opposed to Mormon, is not that they're too Christian, or it's not that they're not Christian enough, it's that they are too Christian in the eyes of folks who are very secular. So the idea that, first of all, I don't think
it's not that they're too Christian, it's that they have like a unified political viewpoint that is pretty,
pretty
goes against a lot.
Anna Marie,
conservative.
Okay,
I would say conservative. It's not Christian necessarily, it's conservative.
If you are a liberal person and you believe the Mormon Church guides people towards a politically conservative view of the world, well then yes, obviously naturally you would have that problem. Or you'd find that objectionable. But the idea that you would say as a result of that, I would never vote for a Mormon, you know what I call that? I call that bigotry. That's imposing, basically, that's...
I kind of just want to jump in a little bit. I agree with you when people say that they're not going to vote for someone because they're a Mormon. And I do think that's something you might see perhaps on the far left, and that's something that you definitely do see from evangelicals. I mean, there's just no arguing it. That is something that evangelicals...
will argue less of it on the right than you find on the left. But
okay, I don't think that it's the theology of the Mormon Church that presents a problem, especially in the case of Rubio, and I feel like an idiot for forgetting about that in my answer about Rubio before, but it's that Mormonism is perceived as being weird, and I'm sorry to kind of like put it that way, but I think that tends to be what people think of as far as the Mormon Church goes. It's not that they object to their theology. They probably don't know a lot about it. Mm-hmm. But what they do know just rubs them the wrong way. Yeah. And
I left out that if you read the actual teachings of the Mormon Church,
which are weird, by the way.
Well, I mean, people will say, well, I did not know that. That is surprising. That is not what I believe. But, I subscribe to a faith that believes that, on Sundays we eat the body and blood of Christ. I mean, that's kind of, and I would say those of you who have a religious belief that no one else in America finds weird, please step forward. And there are probably like 5 people out there who are actually stepping forward, utterly convinced that their religious beliefs are normal and everybody else is weird. But the answer is
I agree.
Religious faith brings people to people in very, odd. And I'm not saying that you are a subscriber to that theory.
No, but I agree that religion requires people to kind of believe quote-unquote weird things, like I'm not in the body and blood of Christ being the most obvious example, but they say that old buildings and prostitutes and I guess religions get respectable with time. And then the problem with the Mormon Church is that it was founded in recent memory, and so it hasn't had like the time for its so-called, for its weird beliefs to achieve a patina of age, unlike the Christian Church. So I mean, I again, like this is sort of it's a hard point to quantify, but I think that's sort of the problem that Romney runs into. And I'm just going to go out on a limb about the Rubio issue, which is that having been a member for a short time, in a way, sounds weirder than being a member now. And the fact it was when he was a child probably helps, but I do kind of think it's the flirtation with the Mormon religion that might unsettle people a little. I don't think that's a reason that people would not vote for him. It might be. I think the reasons that people start to have a bias against a candidate tend to be when they find out things about that candidate that confirm to a suspicion they already have.
All right, so if go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and Mitt Romney has a real problem with that, because every time he makes a gaffe, it seems to just go right to his already perceived weaknesses about being wooden and about being insincere and about not being a real conservative. But
all right, so if I hear this correctly, obviously people's religious beliefs will be a consideration, but is Marco Rubio the top choice for both of you in terms of the likelihood of a vice presidential candidate?
I actually don't I think that he's the most well-known name, but I really do think I want Jim to start naming some names because I'm blanking on all the ones that he said before that I think are really interesting, and there's an argument for each one of them. Who's the female governor, the Latina female governor?
Susana Martinez, the governor of New Mexico.
Everything I hear about her makes me think that that would be a really interesting choice. And
Swing state, Hispanic woman governor, former tough-minded prosecutor, went after child molesters and corruption. I mean, that's that's a tailor-made biography. If you were writing a political novel, that's kind of who the stock character you'd be putting into that category. A name that I feel I should throw out there, and I've talked about this quite a few times, is Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. The fact that I really like the guy is probably one of the reasons I keep mentioning the guy so often. Obviously, the usefulness of Chris Christie as a surrogate for Romney, and the fact that as I call him, the fat man who gives you the skinny. If Romney has a problem with a lack of charisma or a lack of joviality, Chris Christie has success. And perhaps excess is one of the words that comes to mind with Chris Christie. But basically, it's entirely possible that the Romney campaign will like what he does as sort of being the wild and crazy side of the Republican ticket. The more pugnacious and outspoken version if Romney is buttoned down and cerebral and pleasant and on the straight and narrow, white bread. I mean, there's all of those folks. I think any Republican elected statewide in a swing state is likely to get it. So Rob Portman, not the most daring or exciting guy, but certainly a guy who is a solid history in budgetary matters and stuff like that. Keep an eye on Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin. I think is probably an outside chance. Look, I think it's safe to say any Republican who has been elected statewide, who has a certain amount of Tea Party cred, who has no major scandals in their background, is going to get some fairly serious consideration. I think this is a year in which Republicans are kind of looking at this field and saying, oh, God, this guy's flawed, that guy's flawed. But boy, do we have a bench for the we have a ton of beat picks. We have tons of people. We have a million backup quarterbacks and no starter.
So could we safely rule out Sarah McCain? Sarah
McCain?
Is that a safe assumption?
Google News, breaking some news this evening.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
Pretty safe to say. I mean, and also whatever. I have opinions about Sarah Palin that could probably take a while to unspool, but very few of them actually have to do with her future in politics. I don't think that that's something that she's even enthusiastic about.
Sarah Palin is who I meant to say on the lawsuit, certainly. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Been there, done that. Go. Why need a rerun?
Yeah. All right. Before I let you both go, you each get a chance to describe yourselves in one word.
Present.
Awake.
All right. Well, you were both fantastic. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, Anna Marie Cox and Jim Geraghty. A delightful discussion and some great insights. Thanks so much.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.